Chris Johnson. I'm a professor emeritus photography here at CCA, and welcome to our 2024 Senior BFA Thesis Conversations in Photography. Before I begin, I want to start by sharing our land acknowledgement. CCA is located in the Waihichu and Yalamu, also known as San Francisco, on the unceded territory of Chicheyo and Ramaytush Ohlone people, who have continuously lived on this land since time immemorial. We recognize the historic discrimination and violence inflicted upon indigenous peoples in California and the Americas, including their forced removal from ancestral lands and the deliberate and systematic destruction of their communities and culture. CCA honors indigenous peoples, past, present, and future, here and around the world, and we wish to pay respect to local elders, including those in the lands from which you are joining us virtually today. If you're unsure whose land you're currently residing, we encourage you to visit native-land.ca. So, as most of you know, these BFA conversation events have become a tradition for all programs in our school. But what you may not know is that the concept and format for these began when graduating seniors needed a way to express themselves during the pandemic years, when our own Professor Nelson Chan was looking for a way to not only share and celebrate the great work of our students, but also to provide a fresh perspective on what they are doing from a respected outside voice. And I'm very pleased that this has given me the opportunity to invite Karen Adams to join us. So Karen graduated from CCAC back in, remember that school, 1993, with a BFA in photography. So she's actually one of us. So this is really a conversation amongst friends. Karen is the Senior Curator of Art at the Oakland Museum of California. She received an MFA in sculpture from the School of Art, the Art Institute in Chicago. Her work at the museum is focused on the intersection of contemporary art, craft, and the diverse cultural communities of Oakland. She led the 2016 exhibition, Yo-Yos and Half Squares, Contemporary California Quilts, which featured the work of Rosie Lee Tompkins alongside other San Francisco Bay Area quilters from the Eli Leon collection. More recent projects include the reinstallation of Mildred Howard's immersive artworks, TAP, Investigation of Memory, and the very special exhibitions, Telefeminist and Into the Brightness, which I'm sure that all of you have seen. So thank you, Karen, for joining us. This is going to be a lot of fun. Before we begin, I want to thank our program managers, Nargis and Ingrid, and of course, our program chair, Aspen. Oh, hi, Aspen. Aspen Mays. So the way these programs work is that each senior will be given 10 minutes for their presentation, and then we'll have a 10-minute conversation for Karen to offer questions and comments, and really just a short conversation with our students. Please note that we won't have time for public Q&A, but we invite those of you who are here to drop affirmations and questions in the Zoom chat, where they will be saved and passed on to our presenters as a kind of virtual guest book. These conversations are being recorded and will be available for viewing on the CCA portal website. Also, please keep your microphones muted during the presentation to avoid overlapping voices. So we have 5 students here presenting this afternoon: Annabel De Vries, Madison Sawyer, Roy Almanza, Leo Burr, and Zoe Loa. So now, without further ado, here's our first graduating senior, Annabel.
Hello. Just gonna share my screen. Whoa, I'm a little too early. Hi everyone. My name is Annabel De Vries, and I'm currently a graduating senior in the photo department. Everyone can hear me, right? Cool. I just wanted to start by sharing this picture of me as a kid in my childhood home. I grew up in Mill Valley, California, which is just right across the Golden Gate Bridge. I feel really lucky to have grown up there, surrounded by nature and so close to an amazing city like San Francisco. I really started taking photos around the age of 14 with access to my high school's darkroom, which really motivated me to pick up a film camera. And I originally had decided to take that class because my older sister did, and naturally I wanted to do really everything that she did and still want to be as cool as her. I was lucky enough to grow up in a creative family with parents who always encouraged me to follow my passions and supported my interests in art and going to art school. I wanted to kind of start off talking about my work with some earlier images. These few images are some of the early work that I made during my freshman year at San Francisco Art Institute, where I started my education. I had had previous experience in the darkroom, but I really started to explore self-portraiture for the first time and began the process of figuring out what kind of photographs I wanted to make. Looking back at this work, there's a pretty clear link to the work I'm making now, which still involves self-portraiture and themes of family and home. I was mainly working with 35 millimeter and medium format for this work and spending most of my time in the darkroom, where kind of my love in photography really thrives. Moving on to some inspirations I had definitely during this time and now for this work that I'm making now, but really the whole time I've been making art. The first one being LaToya Ruby Frazier, and specifically her project called The Notion of Family. I've started studying her work in my freshman year at SFAI when I was in the process of thinking about what kind of images I wanted to make formally, but also conceptually. I was paying attention to how she photographs herself as well as her close family members around her, like her mom. Secondly, Nan Golden was one of the first photographers I was ever really introduced to, probably at the beginning of high school, specifically with her most popular or most known project, Ballad of Sexual Dependency. Her work showed me how personal relationships can be portrayed through photography and the levels of intimacy that can be exposed through a camera lens, as well as the rawness she displayed when she made self-portraits. Lastly, and there's probably like an endless list of photographers I could talk about, or just artists in general, but Justine Kurland's project called Girl Pictures has influenced my work and how she portrays girls and women, the community between us, and our ways of interacting and shared experiences and emotions. I've also been really influenced by the way that she sets up a constructed photograph, but makes them feel candid in the same way, which I've kind of tried to attempt with my thesis work. My thesis project has been brewing for all my years at school, but started to become clearer during the last 2 years at CCA. I've always been photographing home and family and myself, really. These images involve the subject of myself, my mom, and the landscape that we both grew up in. I was raised in a small home right behind the house that my mom grew up in at the base of Mount Tamalpais. Me and my mom got the special experience of growing up in the same place. We came of age under the same redwoods and went through our milestones on the same street, same schools, same parks, same kind of everything. This commonality has built a very strong connection for both of us to our home and the landscape of Marin County, as well as a strong connection between us having so many shared experiences here. The core of this project really lies within living memories, passed down stories, and acts of care between the women in my family. Though these photographs don't include my grandmother directly or other women in my family, their history and experiences are an integral part of me as an artist when making these photographs. Here's a photo of an old picture of my grandmother and her lipstick blotting paper taken in the house where my mother grew up in. Including this image was kind of a way for me to nod at my family history in the project. When I take photographs with my mother, I pay attention to how our environment and surroundings affects us, investigating the overgrown vines and redwood trees that have been the backdrop to these complex relationships. With my mother's participation, I attempt to reinterpret our past and present memories surrounded by the landscape we call home. During this process, the control of the shutter is passed between us, as well as ideas behind the composition and poses. This process has fostered a sense of agency for us in different ways. For my mother, the agency of her body in front of the camera, and for me, my agency as her daughter now in my adulthood. When I was first working on this project, I was really only making portraits of me and my mom. Only this last year has the landscape started to become a bigger part of the visual conversation with some push from my professors. And that was a little out of my comfort zone originally, but I found to really start liking it because I was so used to photographing people and myself. I believe that the landscape images are included to carry some of the weight displayed in the portraits and to also provide some context to our relationship. They serve as a third character in the visual story of closeness and deep understanding between relationships in place. Through this collaboration, I have become more understanding of how I move through the world, similar to the way that she does. We share a similar awareness of others' expectations and capacity for emotions, which is a gift between us. I will forever be seeking the evidence of this emotional weight in the landscape and our presence in front of the camera. After all the images, I just wanted to show a quick install shot of my thesis show that was up last Wednesday. Both of my parents were a huge help in making this project possible. It really wouldn't exist without my mom's participation, and my dad helped me put it together in the final iteration by hand making all the frames used in my thesis show out of reclaimed redwood. I feel like it really brought the work together in its completion. My plans for after school, I really just plan to stay in the Bay Area and start my life of art making and working in any way I can. I will probably forever be making this work of me and my mom as we change over time in the future. I hope to include other family members as well. And I would like to eventually attend grad school in a few years, but I'm looking forward to exploring other bodies of work before then. I want to say thank you to all my studio managers and professors who have made my time at CCA so amazing, and SFAI for kind of starting all of it for me. I've been so lucky to be around amazing artists who have supported me in my projects and education, and who have all truly changed my life in different ways. Yeah, thank you so much for listening. This is where you can find me, my email and website. And that's all. Thank you.
Great, Annabelle. Thanks so much. So, Karin, you have 10 minutes to have a conversation with them.
Should I leave my screen on?
Maybe turn it off so we can see each other a little bit.
Yeah.
Can you see? Yeah.
How do I stop share? Okay.
Thanks. That was such a pleasure to hear you talk about your work, and thank you for including an installation shot. I'm
This
sorry.
is a Dear Media production.
Sorry, 1 second.
That's okay. It's so interesting to see the way that that your mother is really a collaborator in this work. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the challenge of negotiating that, right?
I don't know if there was any challenge. I had a very willing participant. Yeah, she was pretty easy. I feel like we have a close enough relationship, and I always had like kind of just a camera around with me, so there wasn't really any negotiation. I was like very lucky to have such a willing kind of model and participant and collaborator. I think in that process, at first it was really me like controlling everything that was happening,
right,
as far as taking the images, but I think naturally and with like a little bit of my encouragement for her to be a part of the image making process just kind of came with time. So I started asking her like, what kind of photos do you want to take with me, or like what kind of memories do you have of us that we can like reinterpret in this way in front of the lens. Yeah.
So when you're looking back at the body of work, and in regard to that collaboration and the flow of how it came to be, is there a demarcation where your strong direction kind of eased and you and your mom began working more fluidly as collaborators in it, or did it just happen slowly and
I
you
think
can't
I
mark
think it
it?
happened pretty fast. A lot of like I had tried, I think before like the last couple of years, I had tried kind of like I had a hard time like making the like constructed image that I like wanted to, or like making what I had in my brain possible and physical, like as a photograph. And I think with just I got in like a groove of like spending more time with it and with her, that I don't know if there was like it that collaboration like came pretty quickly as we started. I'm pretty sure like most of the photos that I took where we weren't collaborating as much are even like used in my final selection of images.
Mm,
Definitely there was like a lot of photos taken trying to like figure out
yeah,
how I wanted to make
yeah.
images and how I wanted to involve her. I think they like started to feel like a little bit more authentic once she became yeah, more involved in like the actual image making process.
And now that the landscape has become a almost third partner, are there what has that opened up for
I
that
think
process?
that part has been interesting because like that's the non-collaborative part of it.
Mm,
But I think all the photos are taken in these spaces like that we're both so familiar with, and that I never really like took time to investigate with my camera before this project. Like it was something that was like boring to me kind of
mhm,
before. And I feel like that kind of brought a new connection like in my mind to how like special our relationship has been fostered by this like same place,
mhm,
as individuals and as like mother and daughter. So I feel like for me personally, it like kind of built a different relationship to the landscape. Just the process of like going around and exploring and taking images and seeing things that I'd never noticed before, having like lived there my whole life.
mhm.
And then knowing like that she, yeah, crossed all the same streets or probably had seen the same things. I feel like that was, yeah, I felt like kind of like in her shoes a little bit when I was like walking around in, because I was like being more intentional about it than just like living and walking around and growing up there.
Well, I mean, there's such a palpable intimacy um, in the stories that I think that I imagine that you're telling through the work and their sequence, and I'm wondering, like, how important is it for you for me to know that 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 um you're telling like a generational story and an intimate personal story? How much of that do you want me to know as your audience?
I guess it's not, I think, I think just like when if you're looking at the project, just like talking generally about like mother-daughter dynamics and like the kind of interconnectedness of our like those relationships and sometimes like the intensities, but also like extreme closeness, I don't think it's that important.
Hmm.
I think for I think it's like I get excited telling people about it. Like I don't think it's important to know necessarily for the work to like exist,
Hmm.
if that makes sense. That
Yeah,
answer.
it totally makes sense. I usually want to ask artists about that. So much of my work now is about connecting with people and the things that um, drive their creative process and what their intentions are, and then trying to draw a line of how much of that to share with the public who may not know, like
Mhm.
what's going to help people um, get from the work what the artist is trying to say. So I was just curious about that. And also had a thought about the way that landscape is coming into your practice, and I think having that context included in this like intimate story of mother-daughter relationships and family stories and generations has a lot of possibility, and you know, digging into that more deeply as you have with the collaboration with your mom, thinking about it like that, I think could open a pathway for a really compelling next body of work.
Yeah, I'm excited to like see where that goes with my like art making or next body of work or whatever that may be.
Yeah, because it, you know, nature isn't just like our lives, like the rest of nature isn't static, and approaching your the natural world, your context, like as a collaborator, and all the things that it could bring and take you to outside of your control, seem like there's a lot of possibility there.
Yeah, thank you.
So I think we are ready to move on. Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Get
much.
started. Thanks, Karen.
Thank you.
So next is Madison Sawyer.
Hello.
Hi.
Let me share my screen. Okay. Everyone see it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm Madison Sawyer, photography major. Here's a little baby picture of me. I grew up in Los Angeles, and as a kid, I was kind of always a maker creator, whether it was taking sort of like really old disposable cameras or the cheap ones that you could get at Target or Walgreens kind of around my neighborhood. And I use that as like a way to get out of the house and kind of like explore my neighborhoods. And I was also very fortunate to have a darkroom in my middle and high school. And that's where I became very fond of like learning the technical side of like developing and shooting black and white film photos. And then as I was growing up, I kind of realized that I was way more fond of taking and doing film rather than like sitting in a math or biology class. And then I took it more seriously as I moved to San Francisco and like ended high school. My first sort of inspiration is Noah Doley, and I was shown him in my alternate process class, and just like his tonal ranges in his cyanotypes are really inspiring, and the way that he sets up shots like smoke and mirrors in The Dad with Watermelon to make into a cyanotype was really inspiring, especially when I began making cyanotypes in that alternate process class. My other one that I chose was like Oshiga, and throughout CCA, I've like heard of a lot of her work, and I've seen a lot of her work either in MoMA or just slideshows, looking at books, things like that. And her use of color, especially at night, was really inspiring to me, and just the way that she's technically great at creating these scenes that sort of blend the reality of real and fantasy, especially her work in Raising Kagan. And then here's some of my early work from CCA, and it was from a book that I made in one of Nelson's class called Pigments of Imagination. And I explored my neighborhood and newfound home within the vibrant San Francisco, and all but three of the images, I believe, were taken in the few blocks around my house. And when I came to CCA, I was trying to stray away from what I was doing in high school and middle school, sort of the traditional black and white portraits. And I moved to doing digital and very vibrant colors. And then I also wanted to photograph people in a new way, sort of making them anonymous or hiding their faces in these ways, and sort of also showing the presence of humans without actually photographing them. And then as I moved into this way of photographing, I was really drawn to colors and light and how they affect and can manipulate emotions and meanings in photography. And through this exploration of color, I was really drawn to the color blue. And I realized I was going out and shooting a lot in the blue hour, which is the 40-30 minutes of sun right before the sun actually sets or rises. And then because of that and all these color explorations, I decided I was going to go on the Iceland study abroad trip. And I went in 2022, and it drastically shifted the way I thought about creating photo projects as a whole. And the ideas of grief and bringing color and light together to manipulate the meaning of photographs were at the forefront of my mind during this entire trip, especially because this trip was a place that I've always wanted to go to with one of my friends who passed away. And Iceland is an extraordinarily vast and barren place, but also full of life in other areas of it. And I kind of focused on how the landscapes could suggest the presence of humans without directly photographing them, also focusing on scale and color again. And I was also very lucky to go during the summer where the blue hour didn't only last half an hour, it was like 4 or 5 hours at some times. And in these works, I was playing around with the color blue and really focusing on what it meant to me. And then while traveling around the ring road, I found myself questioning the idea of place. And a big question that arose during the trip was if this new place was experiencing me or if I was just experiencing the place. And I also felt very at home in Iceland, even though that was the first time I've ever gone. And I found comfort in that land, and I wanted to photograph it through my eyes. And then moving on from Iceland, I kind of took all those ideas of color and grief and all those emotions I explored in Iceland, did a project about grief following the significant loss of my friend, and I called it Inevitable. I wanted to use less color in these photographs to help push the narrative of losing myself while grieving, and the photo series was made to show how the brain changes while undergoing, so sort of that mental side of like high levels of anxiety, weakening memory, and social skills being kind of lost and leading to the overall isolation and removal of normal life. These were the other ones in that series. All of these images, Natural Neurons 1 and 2 were in Santa Cruz, and then the 2 in the middle were taken at Muir Woods on like a rainy day. And I kind of wanted to use the comfort of landscapes that I was more comfortable with and familiar with, and also use the uncertainty of the natural world to portray the way that like my brain was feeling during grieving and sort of emphasize those feelings of like loss, isolation, and confusion. And then after this project, I was in an alternate process class, and I instantly fell in love with the cyanotype process, not only for the blue hues that I've been drawn to forever, but being so hands-on with work again. Because I did so much digital work since coming to CCA, I was really excited to do something hands-on and like print stuff out, put it in water, do all of those things. And I had like this sense of care that I didn't have for a lot of my digital photography work. And then at the beginning of the class, I did a lot of things on paper and just sort of going back to my old pieces of work and reinventing them. And that was like a way of healing and moving on from those old projects. And then I wanted to do something even more delicate in a way. So I started using tea bags as like my paper. And yeah, I also started toning them with different like dyes and powders. And I used like green tea, this henna dye, inks and coffee to sort of manipulate the colors into like different feelings I was having. And the tea bags are just like little moments of vulnerability I could share with people like over a cup of tea. And then for my thesis, I chose some images that were on the wall that I'm very fond of. And all of the images that were on the wall were cyanotypes printed on fabric and then toned all differently. And along with the images on the wall, I also printed pictures of like my actual room on pillowcases, and I printed a bed sheet that would go on an actual bed that was in the gallery. And then Here's more. I decided to create a mock-up of my room where I underwent extensive physical grieving and show how it had transformed into a sanctuary for the people closest to me. The collection of work combined all my prior photographic studies concerning the emotion of color and my encounters with grief. And then in the little statement, I wrote, "The quietude speaks volumes in the silence that pervaded these captured landscapes. From the desolate land of Iceland to the tranquility of the Santa Cruz Mountains, I found that the emptiness of the world mirrored my emptiness of my heart while grieving. Capturing these vacant spaces alleviated the void within me, whether through the simple pleasure of sharing tea with a friend, embarking adventures to new destinations, or extending an invitation to the first door on the right." And the name of it was First Door on the Right, because that's where my room is when you walk into my house. And then I added some little installation shots from it. And then, what's next? I kind of want to continue my exploration of cyanotypes, and making the bed sheets and the tea bags and the pillowcases was very interesting because I kind of got to take stuff off of the walls and put it into a space. So I kind of want to work more on that. And then for the ongoing grief project, I want to move it forward to like the hope side and the like moving forward with myself as I'm like moving on from CCA. I'm not really sure what that looks like yet, but that's the next idea. And then thank you. Here's all the contact information.
Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Madison.
So,
That was incredible. That's so helpful to see what your early influences are, and get a glimpse of what your early practice was too. I really appreciated that. Annabelle's too. Your work is just stunning. It's beautiful. Sorry to not get to see it in person. Really, it's objectness. The way that you're moving towards installation is really fascinating, exciting. There's a real like physicality to your work, and that's interesting because grief is so all-consuming and feels so endless and boundless and outside of ourselves, like outside of our bodies and minds and spirits. It just feels like a vast expanse as it's happening, and I love the way that your work actually connects to that. Yeah. The tea bags and the intimacy of them, and the way that I know that when you hold a tea bag, it feels like it's about to evaporate. That must have been such a challenging project, just from a technical point of view. How did you? Could you talk a little bit more about how you came to use such a fragile object? Yeah.
I've seen some people like use this piece of paper that's very like tea bags, and I have seen people like print on tea bags and do like outside cyanotypes, just kind of laying things on top of them. But then I thought I can just print very small digital negatives and then actually expose that photo on top of them. So I had to kind of cut the back of them and shake all of the tea out, kind of coat them before exposing them all. So I did rip a lot, and they were very delicate, but I found like such a beauty in doing that because it was such like a different way of working than I had been doing for my first 2.5 years at CCA, really. Yeah, but I just love that kind of aspect.
Yeah, I do too. That's really special. There's there's the photographic process and installation aspect, and all the things that go into the making of, but it seems like your work also has coincided with the tremendous amount of just emotional processing. And I guess I'll ask you a similar question as I asked Annabelle, like how much of that do you want me to know
I
when I'm
think
looking at your work?
I think like the details of it and like how close I was, it's not really important for that to be in the statement, I guess, but at least
Mhm.
for people seeing my work, like everyone at school or like my friends, it's very known like how close that person was, and it does help a little bit, but I think I'd rather try and translate that sort of relationship in the work itself instead of like telling
Mhm.
everyone this is
Yeah.
exactly how it happened and all of that. So I kind of like that idea.
Yeah.
But I think it is important that people know where it's coming from.
Mhm.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. In a bigger
Mhm.
psychological sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. An emotional narrative, but not a specific personal one. Right. Well, I think that came across really well.
Thank you.
Yeah. Congratulations.
Thanks.
Great. Well, thank you, Maddie. Thank you, Karin. So next we have Roy.
Hey, let me start this up. Okay. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Great. Hello, everyone. My name is Roy Almanza, BFA Photography. I'm a first-generation Chicano from the San Fernando Valley, California, and I'd like to begin with my intro into the arts and how the place I grew up has influenced my work. So, my mother is a huge reason why I got into the arts. She's a very creative person and has always supported my artwork. She's constantly working on personal projects around the house and always has like a vision of what she wants to create, and I really admire that. When I was a child, my mom would always have some sort of art project or craft project for my cousins and I to work on when they would stay over. And I remember making ornaments and painting, making paper mache masks and so on. And this love for making things with my hands was ingrained into me at a very early age. Now I think a big influence in my work, in the work I've made and continue to make now, is because of San Fernando Valley. Growing up, I was surrounded by the arts and culture, and I mean to me that the side of the valley I grew up in is a very monolithic community. It's so very Latino, and that influence is everywhere. I grew up looking at murals consisting of religious icons, revolutionaries, artists, cars, and more. My parents' house is a short walk from the San Fernando Mission, and across the street from there is a large park where on Sundays the parking lot and sidewalks would be filled with Impalas, Fleet Lines, Rivieras, Monte Carlos, and Cutlasses. And I would beg my dad to walk down with me to see the cars and admire the work that was put into them. I love the idea of being able to create something so individualistic. When I was 18 and got my license, I bought a 1972 Buick Skylark. I had a whole plan to, customize it and make it my own, but I got into an accident and all my money that I had saved up had been swallowed up in repairs. Um, I didn't really come into photography until I was in community college. Uh, when I was entering high school, photo classes and most of the arts were being cut from my school's programs. So I went into video production, filmmaking, as most do in the LA area, and I enjoyed it for the most part. But I decided to follow that into college, getting my associate's degree in video production. But honestly, I fell out of love with it when I started to work odd jobs with other students. The process really felt really restraining, and the culture around filmmaking always felt strange to me, almost uninviting. So I began to search for something more free and less structured. And I remember buying a cheap toy camera from the San Fernando Swap Meet and some expired film that had been sitting out, and I began shooting all the time. Early on, I loved to photograph my neighborhood, my friends, shows I attended in backyards, and so on. And when I couldn't afford to send in film for development, I learned to do it myself. Photo really gave me so much control and freedom, and I fell in love with this process. And the more I got into the world of photo, I began to search for other artists who work in this medium that I could take inspiration from. And I found that one of my favorite musicians also practiced this art, Phil Elverum of the Microphones. I love Phil's music and photo work, and I was so enamored with his ability to jump between mediums. He works in film and music and photography and illustration, and I felt it important, this idea of being able to be an artist that had no specific label, someone who could jump between mediums and do what felt was important to them at that moment. Another important aspect in the arts for me is representation. I felt like while I was studying the arts and photography, I was being presented with so many white artists that while the work was great, I had trouble connecting to. So it took time to research artists similar to me in background, and I came across Luis Carlos Bernal and his work documenting the barrios of the Southwest. So much of his work reminds me of home. The shrines that he photographed gave me flashbacks of the large crucifix that hangs over my grandfather's bed. And seeing his work for the first time at SF MoMA was a real moment for me. It truly gave me hope for having a photo of mine one day in that collection. Okay, so on to the thesis work. So I began this project originally with this idea of questioning the value of religious icons that were plastered everywhere in Latin communities. And as I photographed and photographed, it became more of an exploration into worship and what folks devote themselves to. I tried my best to make work that was both inward looking and outward. And I tried my best. Oh, sorry. I photographed the serenity of churches, the ornate style of the lowrider, family heirlooms, murals, plant life, and storefronts, all in which felt important to me when trying to discuss spirituality. And I wanted to talk about these opposite ends and the spaces in between them. While I was working on this project, I really began to think about my feelings surrounding the church and this uneasiness being inside these centers of faith. I wanted to display my anxiety surrounding that, and I felt that I could do this efficiently through the use of photograms made from leaflets that were traditionally passed out on the street when people were preaching. Some of these pamphlets really stoked a feeling of fear pushed by the church. And when the day of the thesis show came around, I was really excited to present this work for everyone. I was a bit anxious on what my mother would think, who is a really devout Catholic. And I was surprised when she told me that she understood the work and felt that the basis of it was finding God in various places. And well, I'm not sure if I agree with the interpretation. I did love that interpretation. Now I don't think that this project is finished, but I'm not too sure as of right now to see where it goes next. I do believe that it's kind of pushed me to re-examine my feelings on faith and spirituality, and I hope that the work can evoke this sort of feeling onto others. And that's an image of the installation close up, as well as a book that I printed for the to display more of the work. After graduation, I do plan on taking somewhat of a break from photography. Before I began working on this project, I was exploring printmaking, and I'd really like to continue that. like carving into copper plates really scratches an itch in my brain, and it's such a tactile experience and such hard work, but it's so exciting to create an image out of nothing on a piece of metal. There's my contact information. I just want to say really quickly that I just want to thank my friends and family who took the time to help me out through this project. I wouldn't be able to have done any of this without you. Thank you.
Great, Roy. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Roy. That what an amazing trajectory. Just I love that really early toy camera photo. And yeah, just what you said about, you know, just the freedom and that's possible in photography. And also to hear how you're already planning and thinking of ways of adding other platforms to your practice. That installation just looks incredible. Really, really intense, powerful, emotional. And I could see how it's really possible for people to find themselves in their own interpretation of this project that also seems incredibly personal and intimate. So, thank you. How did you decide what images were really going to anchor this installation?
Well, originally I had planned to print of the larger frame prints a few of the images I took at churches and a few storefronts. But and I didn't know how to implement my photograms into this installation. And I was given advice from Aspen of just overwhelming the viewer.
Mm-hmm.
Like, let's project my anxiety onto everybody else. And because I was doing this, I was like, oh, there's an imbalance now. I can't have all this religious text and imagery and then have 2 images of car.
Mm-hmm.
So my balance was the photograms were all religious, the frame photos were cars, and then my centerpiece image was somewhat of a blend.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So often people include religious imagery inside their cars and like on their cars too. It's really interesting. And are you, so do people do you pass out? Is there a part of this project that involves giving people things, or was that in did I
The
misunderstand that part?
Oh, that the part of which people they give me things. So I would take pamphlets from people who were preaching and
Mm-hmm.
use those for the creation of the photograms.
Ah, okay. So did this project really come out of walking your neighborhood, or did you do the project sort of here in
Um,
in
kind of both. I mean,
uh-huh.
it started with me collecting these pamphlets from people in where I used to live.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it also came from having a conversation with my mom about my unwillingness to do my confirmation for the Catholic
Mm,
Church,
wow. Yeah.
and a conversation we had in Mexico City when we were viewing the large image of the Virgin Mary and complaining to her about this, religious icon is a tool of colonialism. And she was like, yeah, but we reappropriated it and it's ours now. So I it's been a journey for me of like where do I stand with religion and the Catholic Church.
It also sounds like it's so much about your family and your connection to your mom too, right? Or your
It's
dialogue with your mom.
I really think it's highly connected to my mom.
Yeah, the person who supported your practice from the very beginning, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, that's really beautiful.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Roy. That was really great.
Thank you.
So next we have Leo Burr.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, Bart is going by. I apologize for the noise. Let me just share my screen real quick. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yes, great. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Leo Lauren Burr, and my pronouns are they, them. I am a landscape photographer based in Oakland on Mutsunalone land. Here we can see a burr pod and the seed that lives inside at 10 times magnification that's been photographed on a dissection microscope. The burr is a play on my last name, but also a symbol of my attachment to place. I interpret the spiral as a sort of like labyrinth or life cycle and a link to the earth. The burr houses a seed, representing this core of like vulnerability and growth. So first, I'd like to briefly mention some photographers who have inspired my work. Anna Atkins was a botanist and photographer, best known for her book of cyanotypes, photographs of British algae. And while this book intended to serve as a scientific record, it's also valued today as an art object. And I'm really inspired by this intersection of art and science and how these methods of seeing can create an abstract visual language. Next is Karl Blossefeld, who was a sculptor and photographer. He was inspired by the artistic and architectural structure of plants and their growth patterns. He actually built a series of cameras that allowed him to photograph in unprecedented magnified detail for the time. I really appreciate the way he sort of like fragments his environment and isolating his subject in this empty frame with a blank background that's sort of stylistically similar to traditional portraiture. Carl Struwe was a graphic designer and photographer, and he was considered to be the first artist to work with microscopy. And what's unique about this work is he didn't present his microphotography as scientific evidence, and instead emphasized the microcosm as an abstract world with aesthetic value. He positioned his subject in a rectangular frame as opposed to the circular frame associated with microscopy to elevate his work based on painting and drawing conventions and sort of bring it into the art world. Noriko Fornici is a current visual artist known for her otherworldly depiction of landscape. She abstracts the orientation of her photographs, creating this flat picture plane that emphasizes color and texture. One thing I love about this work is it doesn't really provide a clear path for the eye, sort of allowing it to wander freely within the borders of the photograph. These are the first photographs I made at CCA in my Tools 1 class, and they are of trees on the Oakland campus that have been overlaid with eucalyptus leaves to create this rough edge. In my work, I'm really drawn to textures and patterns in nature and how they're then abstracted when collapsed into this flat picture plane. I also have an interest in handmade zines and bookbinding. I love having my art in a form I could hold and pass around with others. I'm really drawn to the tactile and hands-on aspect of papermaking. So to the left is recycled paper made from test prints, print trimmings, and hemp fibers. In the center is overbeaten abaca fibers with California lace lichen embedded in the sheets. To the right is a combination of foraged chasmanth and yucca fibers and tomato pulp left over from a meal I cooked with my family. And so for the last 2 years or so, I have been learning microscopy. These are photographs of radiolaria, tiny little microscopic organisms that leave behind these delicate mineral skeletons that were preserved in a slide I borrowed from the SF Micro Society. Actually, many of the red rocks on the hilltops of the Bay Area are made up of these tiny guys, little radiolaria fossils. I'm interested in observing place through fragments of organic material. I was really drawn to photographing at a microscopic level because I found that in many ways it mirrored the aerial perspective. This is a sample of my early work, a zine I made 4 years ago when I first started using satellite imagery. Point of view and scale are important themes in my work. I'm interested in this contradiction of an all-seeing God's eye view made accessible through technology, and as well as the subversion of creating abstract imagery from a tool designed by the military to surveil. And I really found that the dispersal patterns of land and water reminded me of tissue, bone, and blood. For the last 4 years, I have focused on the abstraction and recontextualization of colonial landscapes. I began my landscape work during the pandemic from above, so through a screen, photographing on Google Earth with USGS satellites in place of a camera. I was drawn to this work when flying out of SFO. The airplane window sort of felt like the eyepiece of a microscope, and the salt fields below me looked like skin and exposed flesh. More and more, I became really curious about the story of each photograph. A quote by Dr. Robin Wall-Kimmerer in Gathering Moss stood out to me. When we stare out the window into the sun's glare, the landscape is only a flat projection with mountain ranges reduced to wrinkles in the continental skin. Oblivious to our passage overhead, other stories are unfolding beneath us, but we are moving too fast and we are too far away. All the stories escape us except our own. So as a result of not recording the place and through this methodology of abstraction, I began to realize that I had stripped the land of all context. This perspective is informed by my identity as a settler and directly connects to a colonial mentality. So moving forward, I began to do location-specific research as well as sourcing the land stewards and caretakers. An example of this research process is my photograph of so-called Harper Lake, or the indigenous name Payahunadu, translating to the place where water has always flowed. It was once an oasis in the territory of the Serrano and Western Shoshone people until it was depleted by the agricultural development of settlers. So if you look closely, you can see the traces of water carved into the surface of the lake bed. And then this imprint is sort of cut in half by a line of arrows pointing inward. I learned these arrows actually direct military pilots east and west to and from Edwards Air Force Base, and that the military is currently stalling restoration efforts to avoid the repopulation of native migratory birds that have been deemed aircraft strike hazards. So as we can see here, context changes the meaning of the photograph. An abstract image becomes a story of colonial harm. And this knowledge changed the way I viewed and approached land and landscape photography. This is a photograph of sand dunes and snow I made on Paiute land in Kanab, Utah. I was over a year into photographing almost exclusively on a screen. After sheltering in place for the first year of the pandemic, the outside world felt very chaotic and unfamiliar. While photographing, I tried to lean into this feeling and take comfort in the abstract alien forms of the landscape. I also collected a jar of sand and photographed the individual grains under a microscope. My intention was to dive in and look as closely as I could, having grown accustomed to looking at things from such a distance. And I also realized that in isolating the sand grain, I sort of further emphasized the otherworldly aspects of the landscape. It reminds me of an asteroid or some sort of celestial object on a pedestal in a museum. These are photographs of Pond A12 in San Francisco Bay on Ohlone land. It's the ruin of a Cargill salt field. The pond was really like a crater. I was following a path lined with saltgrass and cattails when the marsh just fell away. Nothing grew there, nothing moved or made a sound. The air smelled of sulfur. And while I was shooting, I reflected on how in my years of photographing landscape through a screen, I became very removed from my physical environment and sort of felt as though I existed outside of my body. And in visiting a place I had spent so much time in virtually, I attempt to undo this mode of being by directly placing myself and the viewer on the ground. My work is also informed by my neurodivergence and political identity of madness. I'm interested in how people who identify as mad are drawn to the water. These photographs were made in the coastal town of Gualala on Pomo land. When I was younger, my parents would bring me to the water to teach me how to self-soothe, and I began to see the accumulation of kelp as a representational portrait of my madness, sort of aiding in the transition of water from land to sea. And lastly, this is my thesis installation titled Grounded. Grounded, of course, references my introduction to landscape as an aerial photographer and my efforts towards reconnection, presence, and embodiment. There's a clear lack of orientation in the images. It's not exactly clear where I stand in relation to the land, both physically and conceptually. There's both this element of care and estrangement. My work really seeks to engage with our relationship to land within this context of late-stage capitalism, by challenging what we define as living or worthy of protection. So in this work, through the manipulation of scale, I visually connect land to the body. You can see more of my work and contact me through my website, my email, or social media. Big shout out to Johnny, Race, Tori, Aspen, Nelson, and Chris for all the support and care I've received during my time at CCA. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Leo.
Great,
That
Leo.
was
That's good.
amazing. So
Huh?
incredible.
Thank you.
Seeing the things that we see all the time without seeing, it seems so much, whether a grain of sand or an aerial view of a landscape that maybe we encounter on a screen and haven't moved through. But yeah, I'm really intrigued by that body, land, visible, invisible that you've made in these bodies of work. Yeah, there's a people as part of nature narrative that is coming through to me. And yeah, it was interesting to hear you talk about the accumulation of seaweed as a kind of self-representation. And I wondered if that was something that you were going to continue to explore, or
Yeah, so starting out my experience as a landscape photographer with through a screen, through satellite imagery, it all felt very impersonal, which is not surprising. And And I'm finding with like being physically embedded in the landscape, I'm like making more personal connections with the landscape. So that's definitely something that I was thinking about in that shoot. Wolala is also a place I traveled when I was younger. I would go there every summer with my family and my friends, and it was like one of the first places I started to create an identity like outside of where I grew up. So that place was very important to me. And yeah, it's interesting. It doesn't, I love how people can look at my work and have completely different experiences than I do. That's always something I've really valued. So I never quite know how much I want to share with someone because I want to like honor that experience they have. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I loved hearing you talk about your work and how you came to make it. And I believe that that has added to my appreciation of what you're doing, what you're trying to get at. And I mean, obviously, I think there is a universality to some of the themes that you're addressing, but it helps me to have the specificity of your experience to add to that. It makes it more meaningful to me.
Thank you. That's really helpful to know.
I also think that there's something interesting and worth continuing to explore in the tactile nature of the book you hold in your hand, or the experience of your other senses when you're moving through a landscape in person.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was having a conversation with Roy, and we were talking about like how important working with our hands is, and like how after this like big push for thesis, he was talking about printmaking, and for me, I think it's going to be paper making that really comes to the forefront. After I love digital printing and I love shooting film in color and scanning it. But yeah, something with my hands, something like very tactile where I can bring that materiality into the piece is definitely going to be my focus for the next few months.
Well, that's really exciting. Thanks so much for everything. That was great.
Great. Thank you, Leo. Thank you, Karen. So we have one more artist, Zoe. You're up.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Hi, I'm Zoe Loa. I am receiving my BFA in photography this spring 2024. I was born and raised in Los Angeles to a Jewish mother and a Mexican-American father. So I, at a young age, dealt with a lot of duality in my identity, which I believe informs me. Just included some photographs. I'm going to start off with some artists that have inspired me. I was given a book at the age of 13 by my grandmother, Annie Leibovitz at Work. And there was this spread in the book of Hunter Thompson blowing fire, and then him also writing on the plane. And one of my favorite books is Hunter Thompson's The Proud Highway. So these images really started my love for analog photography, even though I've been photographing since I was 3 years old when my grandmother gave me a point and shoot. Diane Arbus has also informed my work. I am really obsessed with her intimate black and white photographs, her career, her story, the rawness of her life in combination with the rawness of her work. And my mentor, Chris Johnson's work, I had the pleasure of seeing in person at the Monterey County Museum. These works are very important to me as I've struggled with my mother having cancer my whole life. So seeing them in person really, I believe, took me onto a different trajectory with my work. I'm showing a few photographs I took when I was 16 years old of friends. I started photographing with the point and shoot my grandmother gave me and a 35mm. I've always been surrounded by creative people being in Los Angeles. So some of my early work is my friends. Then I wanted to learn a more formal technique. So I pursued my degree at CCA coming from Los Angeles City College. And I've always been photographing, like hitting the streets every single day with my camera. I was given a Rolleiflex, and that started to change the style of my images. So I was pointing the camera at other people. This work was included at the Berkeley Art Center juried exhibition in 2022. Also photographing intimate moments with my friends, continuing that. And pointing the camera at the woman I love. Then I was in this alternate experimental photo class and also paper making at the same time. So I started working with Van Dyke and handmade paper. And also while going through my family archive, I decided that the impermanence of the paper really reflected my experience with my father's archive because I only have about 5 images of him. So putting that into a form of physicality that was temporary just felt right. Also included my mother when she was 13. Then around May of last year, I went back to Los Angeles when my grandfather was diagnosed with dementia. And I only had about a day to go in and reconnect with them and photograph my experience with them. And this is my grandmother showing me the family archive book. And my grandfather pulling off a frame from the wall that I have now in my living room of family archive photos dating back from the 1800s. And then while all this was happening, I was dealing with medical problems for the last year. So I ended up getting surgery for that last October. And after that happened, I had complications from that surgery and I was in the hospital for a little bit. And I decided to take images of myself after pointing the camera at other people for so long. And this became a series quickly called Lucklust. And I'm going to read off a little about this series. Lucklust is a series made in light of a medical trauma. The title speaks of the intense desire for good fortune in times of bad circumstance. This body of work began by focusing on my healing and exposure to nature. I explore my personal journey for reconnection after alteration to the landscape, myself, and others. I find reclamation of the body by immersing myself within the natural world and exercising my sacred relationship to the camera. And I included some install photos from the BFA Senior Show. After graduation, I plan to work. I am going down south to visit my friend. Being a California kid, that's going to be a very interesting experience for me. I plan to keep San Francisco as my home base, but also I feel the urge to go back to Los Angeles and photograph there as well. And this is my contact information. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Zoe. What a journey. Just incredible, really. I'm really struck by the way that you began really with yourself and then looked outward at others and then came back to documenting what was happening to you and how that related to your context. That's really powerful. And I wonder, is that something that you like? How has that changed your practice really to go from outward focus back to yourself? And do you see yourself continuing with that?
It has, I feel like I'm just scratching the surface of this body. And after thesis was over, I actually could think for a second, and all of these images were coming to my brain that I felt the need to make. So I think so. I believe that my work will shift due to that. My relationship to the environment has changed, and it's become a very spiritual experience to photograph myself within nature. And I feel that having nature is a privilege, being a city kid. So I really value it, and I think that it has shifted the way that I just hit the streets with my camera and have these conversations with other people, and instead I have this solitude act by myself that is more of a catharsis than it is documentation.
Yeah, it seems like a different kind of storytelling, right? And yeah, I think that there's so much that you could continue to explore in that way. But also senior thesis, and then think in my mind's eye, remembering your earlier work that you describe as documentary, it seems like you were already starting a kind of storytelling that was about more than those moments that you were capturing. So maybe there's a way to bridge those different impulses and find a new form of storytelling that kind of includes all of those.
I agree. I think there's a way to bridge the gap between myself, because I think that body was me exploring like my new connection with myself and my body and the land and my other people around me. And I think by adding more or less of other people to that, it will help out with that understanding of what it really is about.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it seems like you've been on a personal healing journey too, and yeah, a reconnecting with your body and the landscape in a way. Yeah, it seems like there's something to the part that other people play in that would be interesting to explore.
Thank you. I agree.
Okay. You know, as I watch this, of course, there's a dimension of this that's expressed in the smiles that Aspen and Nelson and I have on our faces. I mean, we are so proud of the journeys all of you have taken, and we're proud of the environment that the program has provided for so many deep and meaningful explorations. I mean, obviously you're 5 really talented artists, but it's fascinating to see how many different traditions are alive and well in our program, you know, from deep introspection, landscape, very, you know, responsible concerns for the land, real care for the soul, real technique. I mean, all those things are embodied in the work that's there. And it's hard not to be very proud of all 5 of you. And I just want to remind people who are seeing this that this has been recorded, and there's a chat with lots of wonderful comments that you know, add to our reactions. And thank you, Karin, for being here and sharing with us. Welcome back.
Yeah, it's been a privilege, really. Thank you so much, everybody, for sharing the really important work that you've done. Yeah, you should all be so proud.
Yeah, you guys are great. Aspen, do you want to?
Yes, I'm chiming in. Thank you, Karin. It was really wonderful to hear your insights, and thank you, Chris, for steering the ship this semester. And you all, I'm so proud. I just think about our work together in the fall and to see where you brought your thesis work and just your ability to talk so confidently and beautifully and earnestly about your work with just truth and insight. I'm so impressed. I was so impressed with your opening last week. It really fills my little tiny heart with a lot of pride and warmth. So I'm so excited to celebrate all of you. I hope you're all planning to come to Nelson's talk in a few short hours and then join us at the Parkside afterwards.
Yeah, I was going to remind people that Nelson will be talking to Rosemary Cromwell at 7:30 in Timken. So you're all, of course, invited. And I understand there's a gathering after at the Parkside. So once again, thank you so much for putting so much time and thoughtful care into the preparation of your presentations. I mean, it really showed. We know what this means to you as you share your work with the world, and it's a wonderful experience. Thank you so much, and thank you again, Karin.
Bravo.
Okay, thanks everybody, and we'll see you later.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.